Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation over the past 2 days. As you know, the Attorney General's Conference has been now running for quite a number of years. And as we have found in the past number of years, in particular in the 4 or 5 years, we have seen that the quality of the discussions that we've had has improved significantly. And indeed, it's now become a premier conference as far as discussing not only legal issues directly, but also socio-economic issues that actually affect the making of laws and indeed the formulation of laws. And also to be able to question laws that do currently exist and perhaps laws that we do need to introduce into Fiji. Ladies and gentlemen, it's also become a bit of a tradition that I do a bit of a summary or at least give a policy perspective in respect of the topics or the panel discussions that actually has taken place over the past 2 days. There's been a number of significant changes, of course, in some of the 2 major laws that have been brought about in Parliament this year. 2 of them that you discussed over the past 2 days. One of them is about the Accident Compensation Act that's been put in place. The actual Commission's work commences officially from the 1st of January. We understand that the Commission itself has actually selected a new CEO, that we understand the Commission will announce in the next couple of weeks. And then, of course, the compensation itself starts to be paid out through the Commission from the 1st of January. As highlighted earlier on by the panel of speakers, that this system, of course, creates the opportunity to get compensation in a much more expedited fashion. It makes it less cumbersome, it's less litigious. In fact, litigation is almost completely absent if you do not want to challenge the amount that the Commission will actually offer you if you do need that compensation itself. I think there are a couple of key issues. JOSCO, of course, raised an issue regarding rehabilitation. At the moment, the Commission does not envisage paying the type of rehabilitation costs on an ongoing basis as they have, for example, in New Zealand. As was highlighted, the asset base of the New Zealand equivalent is almost, I think about $35 billion. They do have fairly substantial debt also. But the scope of the Commission equivalent in New Zealand is much wider than what we have in Fiji, or what is being proposed for Fiji. In Fiji's case, we're only covering motor vehicle accidents, at least initially. And that, I think, ladies and gentlemen, is very important to be able to understand. We have met literally hundreds of people who have over the years languished because they could not actually get access to compensation. The system was too cumbersome. I recently was in Sambeto, one of the villages living up in the hills, going towards the hills. His wife was injured and subsequently died, never got any compensation. He went from pillar to post. He went to lawyers. Lawyers wanted money up front. There were insurance companies involved. The system was actually too complicated for him to be able to proceed any further. So this is the type of issues that we need to address, and this is what we talk about, economic empowerment, socio-economic empowerment, which is very critical for us to be able to understand that if we want to have an inclusive society, we need to bring about certain changes. Of course, there was, just to give you some experience, there were 1 or 2 insurance companies that were fairly resistant to it, and this is why I highlighted also and publicly acknowledged Sarah Jane Weil from the Tower Insurance, who's also the chairperson of the Insurance Council of Fiji, in her participation. What was really interesting, and I'd like to speak about these things frankly, that one of the insurance companies actually said that it was a conflict of interest because she's also been appointed to the Commission. There is a conflict of interest, and therefore proceeded to get a legal opinion from a lawyer they normally use for the litigation to highlight whether her sitting on the Commission was a conflict of interest or not. Which is very interesting because obviously that is a conflict of interest too. And without the declaration of the fact that this person does all the litigation work, that lawyer proceeded to provide the legal opinion as to whether her sitting on the Commission was a conflict of interest. The irony, of course, was not lost on some people. The situation, however, is, ladies and gentlemen, as we've said, the Commission will now, of course, offer a lot more compensation as to what currently people get under the existing laws, or laws that will end actually on the 31st of December, the compensation. It's also highlighted that we like to include areas that currently do not have any sort of redress mechanisms. So for example, the next thing we may be looking at areas such as sports injuries. As I highlighted yesterday, that we have currently hardly any insurance available for rugby players. As you know, rugby is a very highly impact sports, people contact sports. And in order to build a professional rugby cadre, we need to be able to ensure that we actually look after those people who will become professionals in that field. So the idea of the Commission is to provide a particular avenue and an expedited avenue for assistance and compensation to those people who do deserve it. In respect of the issues such as the rehabilitation, a lot of the rehabilitation actually facilities in Fiji aren't available, primarily because of a lack of personnel. Today, as we've said publicly in the budget consultations also, we do not in Fiji have a Fijian speech therapist who is available 24/7. We do not even have a Fijian cardiologist. If any one of us, God forbid, has a cardiovascular event now and you need open heart surgery, there's nobody available in Fiji to carry out that particular surgery. So we do lag behind in that area of professionalism and expertise. So we cannot actually put the cart before the horse in this instance. We need to be able to take the first few steps and at least build upon those capacities. In the same way, for example, it has an impact on health insurance. You cannot have a national health insurance if the bulk of the requirements of the services will be available offshore. We also have to take into account that almost 130 to 150,000 Fijians are actually self-employed. So we simply cannot rely on FNPF to actually provide the health insurance cover. What about those Fijians who sit outside the FNPF scheme? So these are a number of issues that need to be discussed, and of course I'm the chairperson who's also the governor of the Reserve Bank. We hopefully will be making some announcements in the next few days in respect of the levy that will now be charged for third-party insurance. Currently, of course, you pay premiums, and we expect that the premiums rate, or the levy now as it will be called, will be less than what is currently being paid or being charged to motor vehicle owners. Albinism and, of course, disability rights. As has been highlighted, our understanding of what is disability in Fiji has been fairly limited. I mean, indeed, personally myself, I did not realize that in certain parts of the world, people with albinism actually got murdered. In certain parts of the world, that people who had albinism, certain body parts were seen to be, something that you should partake in to get certain powers. Some of these issues, of course, don't exist in Fiji, but nonetheless, we also weren't aware that people who have albinism actually have a shorter lifespan. We did not realize, of course, that most people, for example, who have albinism have an early onset of blindness. This is why a lot of the children who you see when you go to the Fiji School of Blind actually suffer from albinism. So these are some of the issues that we actually have become aware of ourselves when we actually participate in getting international rapporteurs to Fiji. And the government made a commitment about 2-3 years ago that every year we'll get a UN Special Rapporteur on various aspects. So last year we had the Rapporteur on racism and xenophobia. The year prior to that we had a Rapporteur on education. This year, of course, we have a Special Rapporteur on disability dealing specifically with albinism. And of course, next year we hope to get another Rapporteur. There may be some opportunities for us to be able to get a couple of Rapporteurs in the same year. So perhaps there could be this sort of complementary approach to the assessment. But ladies and gentlemen, the point that I'd like to also make, as the Honourable Prime Minister did make, is that any society is as strong as how well you look after those people who are on the margins of society. And that is very, very important for us, because as a community, as a society, as a nation, we need to be far more inclusive. And sometimes our ability to learn what is inclusive or what does it mean to be inclusive is very limited. In particular, those people whose voices aren't generally heard. In the same way, there is a saying that if you are a person who is actually not being discriminated against, but the other person is being discriminated against, they will be able to tell you a completely new way of looking at life because of what they experience on a daily basis, as opposed to somebody who's not discriminated against. So these are some of the issues that we need to be able to highlight and be able to understand, and of course bring about those various changes in not just attitude, but also how the law can actually affect in the development. Of course, as has been highlighted, there's very little, in fact, if any, jurisprudence that's developed in respect of persons with disability and their rights and the enforcement of that through the court system. Now, of course, we have a very broad set of socio-economic rights and also civil political rights. And we look forward to lawyers being able to develop the jurisprudence in that area using, of course, international law. From a purely, commercial, financial perspective, it is very important that we are able to realize the full productive capacity of all Fijians. I remember, I think it was 2 budget consultations ago, as you know, that we started budget consultations, meeting with not just high school students, but also with disabled groups, etc. And there was a gentleman who was a mute. And what we, of course, in my young days, people who could not speak, we used to call them dumb. But this person was mute, and he worked for a printing company, and through, sign language, he was able to convey, we had a translator, and said that he used to work in a printing company, did exactly the same work that any other person did over in that company, but they weren't giving him any leave. If he got sick, he would not get paid. And they said to him, well, who are you going to complain to? And if you're going to complain to anybody, you can bugger off. That's actually when we did introduce the 300% tax deduction. That's what actually prompted us to do that. And what we have seen since then, uptake, we believe, in respect of the certain claims that we think is coming to the fore now, where people are employing people who are generally seen to be disabled, and they get a 300% tax deduction if they're employed continuously for 3 years. So these are the ways in which we can actually bring people into the mainstream of society and to be able to get a full productive capacity of the country. That's how we actually grow our GDP also. So purely from a commercial, financial perspective, it's very important for us to be able to be a lot more inclusive. In the same way, as I've said to the private sector, when we talk about domestic violence laws, generally a lot of people think, well, that's something for the NGOs, the civil society groups, etc. It's for women's groups. But if you look at most of the hotels you stay at, if you see most of the people who come and clean the hotel rooms that you're staying at are women. If they are being bashed up the night before at their house, or they're being abused, what do you think their productive capacity will be the next day? What is the rate of absenteeism? So these are some of the critical dots we need to be able to connect to be able to get a holistic understanding of how society functions. And that's what I believe that lawyers need to do, in particular for a developing country like Fiji, that is an emerging economy. We need to be able to understand how the dots are all connected. The other thing that Josh also highlighted was about the printing of the notes and the coins. It's done in consultations. It does not cost that much money. It makes people a lot more financially inclusive within the system. So they know, okay, different size note means this is a $5 note, a $10 note, a $20 note, and with the coins they can actually feel it. This does not cost money, but it actually includes people and makes them want to feel committed to the society that they live in. Judge and jury trials. Again, of course, very interesting. I think Davnesh Sharma highlighted, he found it objectionable about how we had jury trials only for people of European descent, and people who are non-Europeans actually had the assessor trials. Of course, if you look at the epistemological basis of most of the laws that we do have in Fiji, in particular if it goes back to the colonial era, it did have that sort of colonial slant to it. In fact, it was not even a slant, it was quite blatantly set, in fact, about how people were homogenized. Now, the question really is that form of homogenistic approach to society and indeed the development of law, is it any more relevant to Fiji? Or is it something that we need to continue or phase off slowly? So I think the issue, of course, is that we need to ask, I think, a lot more fundamental question than that. It's not just about the fact that there is, European descent versus non-European descent, but perhaps what is the fundamental purpose of a decision? What are we really interested in? Are we interested in, the reason why I asked this question, because somebody talked about the democratization of decision making. So are we really interested, what are we interested in? Are we interested in the decision being democratic before a judiciary or by a judicial system? Or are we actually interested in justice? Are we interested in the right decision being made? And some may argue, well, it's actually a balance. It's more of a philosophical question, but it actually does translate into some practical issues, how the law actually should be developed. Do we need to actually have and feel that people need to feel a sense that, well, I actually went and sat down as an assessor and helped make this decision and I found this guy guilty? Or we found him guilty, but the judge overrode us. Is that undermining democracy, perhaps? That's the question one can also ask. Or are we going to look at a system where we believe that perhaps what is seen to be admissible evidence and non-admissible evidence, the rules around that need to be changed? Because some may argue that the rules around what is admissible or not admissible are perhaps out of date. They need to be changed. In the same way we changed the laws pertaining to rape. Because the fundamental Victorian principle was that when a woman sometimes says no, she actually means yes. That's why you needed corroboration. You did not need corroboration for other offenses, but for rape you did. And in fact, I remember in the 1990s when I was in Australia, there's a district court judge in South Australia actually did say that. He said that sometimes when a woman actually says no, she means yes. So you see, the law has been changed as far as corroboration is concerned regarding rape. But perhaps we may need to look at a more fundamental issue regarding what should be introduced or what should be admissible as evidence or what should not be admissible as evidence. And that these are perhaps some of the issues that we wanted you to think more about and to think about, and we hope to have further discussions and public consultations regarding that. I mean, there are of course various ways in which you can object to when assessors can be involved in it's very interesting, the four grounds are, one of them of course, the existing relationship, knowledge before trial, if there is a propensity to favor, or the judge or the court decides it's in the interest of justice that someone should be disqualified. And again, we have a tendency of people thinking that if we have a balance of ethnicities, therefore we'll have a fair assessor trial. But is it only about ethnicities? Is it about gender? Or is it about people who actually can believe and subscribe to justice? I mean, in the same way, I remember in 2007, first when I went to office, and then somebody came up to me and said, well, you have to actually select people for the film censor board. And you need, what the lady said to me, you need one Fijian, one Indian, and one other. And I said, why do I need this breakdown? They said, well, because, I said, where's the legal provision for this? Well, that's the way we do it. So there's no consideration about, do we have a person with disability? Do we have a person who's gay? Do we have a person who may be below a particular age? Do we maybe have a person from Vanuatu? Whatever the case may be. So you see, by being beholden to these demarcators that have been set in train maybe 1 century ago, we are not able to progress on all other fronts. And in a way, we are causing a much greater injustice if we tend to homogenize people. The other topic, of course, ladies and gentlemen, was about access to finance, which is the Personal Property Securities Act has been put in place. Nicholas, we hope that we can use your services a lot more, and we certainly will be, if he's here, using his services too. But again, one of the reasons we'd like to, of course, thank the ADB that actually helped us in respect of this, and also there's some input from the World Bank too. The idea, of course, is be able to help people access finance that they currently cannot. To put simply, if I'm going to buy a motor vehicle for $50,000 and I have saved $40,000 and I need only $10,000 from the bank, the current system is the bank may take a bill of sale or the car dealer may take a bill of sale and it's over the entire asset. So even though the liability is only for $10,000, I have $40,000 of underutilized capital. Capital that is underutilized. What this system does, put simply, is allows me to be able to get other financiers should I need more funding to be and use the same asset. There are so many small businesses, there are so many small individuals that get positively impacted upon by this. There is a huge rate of Fijians who go to money lenders in Fiji. Huge rate. As I've said before in this forum, if you go and look at an ANZ, I've seen the footage of this, when the money hits your bank accounts around about 3 a.m. in the morning, not government, but even all your paydays, you see about 4 a.m., a group of 2 or 3 people will come in, generally with hoods, and they'll have a book, and they'll have this many ATM cards, and they'll withdraw money. They'll be there for about an hour, hour and a half, withdrawing money. These are the money lenders, to whom people give their ATM cards to, they give them their PIN numbers to. And that's the security. Then that person, when the bank opens in the morning, goes and queues up. You see, the reason why these people go to money lenders is because, firstly, they may have no or very little asset base. So even if they have some asset base, that asset base may be tied up with one financier who may actually, has control over the entire asset, even though they may have lent them only 1/10 of the value of the asset. So what this does actually is that it gives people more access to finance. And as has been highlighted by the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, when people get more access to finance, they're able to spend more, it generates economic activity, it creates more economic robustness, it improves the lives of ordinary Fijians. You can now have actually this system applied to crops, to animals. A lot of people actually have those assets, but it's underused or underutilized asset base. Of course, for lawyers, I would suggest to those lawyers who are interested in this, please, there's a lot of legal work there. You need to be creative. As I said to the Law Society conference a couple of months back, there is a lot of legal work that's being generated because of the economic activity in Fiji, but lawyers unfortunately aren't taking advantage of it. How many of you, as you know, there's a tendency in Fiji to have single practitioner practices, and now we've seen a trend, because we get all the trust account applications come to our office, we've seen a trend of 2 or 3 lawyers getting together and forming law firms. But how many of them actually have a website? How many of them are actually reaching out to potential clients through the websites? So don't complain about those lawyers who've got very robust websites and getting all the trademark law, because overseas companies go and do searches, and you need to be able to market yourself. In fact, how many of you know that you can actually advertise for your services? But there is also a need to carry out specialization. A lot of people were saying about, how fluent Nicholas was in his field of work, because a lot of these lawyers overseas actually specialize in different areas of work. So your work may be limited to a particular scope, but you actually become very good at it, and your services will be required. So I urge in particular the young lawyers over here, and not so younger lawyers, to actually focus on those areas too. Create some specialization. If you have 2 or 3 practice law firms, have 1 or 2 of you doing different things, but become very good at it. And a lot of, as you know, is fairly procedural. I'm glad to also know that our system is a lot easier than the Australian one. I know some people are saying that Australians had a nightmare with it, but we obviously will learn from what the Australians did wrong. And if you see, our system is a lot more simpler. But we've been informed by the Reserve Bank that, the Act is not in place as yet. The Reserve Bank, of course, will be the repository for the registry. It makes a lot of work easier. Those of you who've been dealing with conveyancing and these sorts of transactions would know at the moment there's no centralized registry. So if somebody's buying a car, you need to do searches everywhere. Now you'll be able to only go to one registry, and that registry will be controlled by the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Now, the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we understand, is called for tenders, and that they'll have their registry up and running by June of this coming year. Once that is done, and once the Act actually comes into force, then you have 6 months and for all the existing encumbrances, whatever you may call it, actually, in your terminology, that need to be registered in that period. But I would suggest to you very strongly that you start doing the work on it now. Start understanding the Act now. You really have 6 months before it goes live. Then you have another 6 months to ensure that your clients' work, or indeed clients you may not have at all, but there'll be surely people running around once it comes to force and they realize that the work needs to be done for them. You can put your hand up and say, look, I've got the expertise or I've got the knowledge. and I know how the system works. So there is actually work there for you in that respect. So ladies and gentlemen, you know, there's obviously issues such as you need to understand the purchase money security interest, which is PMSI, as opposed to what you currently have is the fixed and floating charge over assets. It'll affect, of course, banks, financial institutions, and hire purchase company, car dealers, etc., that you can, of course, provide services to. We have currently, of course, it creates legal work in the area of the retention of title agreements, leases, and again, what we want to do, of course, is get the best people on the ground to be able to provide assistance for you. So in the next few months, in the new year, we may hold some further workshops. So I urge you, if we do hold it in your area or in your town, please try and attend that, so at least you can get up to speed with it too. The other area, of course, which is obviously very topical, is regulating cyberspace and civil and criminal culpability in that area. But perhaps I do that. I don't want to leave out taxation. Don't want to leave taxation for last. It's very, very exciting stuff, Tex, so we'll do that first now. But, you know, I mean, to put it basically, what has actually happened in the taxation regime in Fiji is that we have tried to streamline the taxation regime in Fiji, make it a lot more simpler, make it a lot more attractive. We have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the Pacific region, and I would venture to say even in most of the countries in the Southern Hemisphere. For a country our size, 20% corporate tax rate, personal income tax no more than 20% unless you earn over $275,000, where you now pay the 10% ECAL. We now have improved the tax threshold. In some cultures, that's actually a very good sign. But huge endorsement for what I'm saying. In 2007, the income tax threshold in Fiji was $8,600. If you earned more than $8,600, you paid tax, 15%, correct? First tax bracket was 15%. It was then increased to $8,800. Then it went up from $8,800 to $16,000. And from $16,000, it's gone up to $30,000. So anybody in Fiji that now earns $30,000 or less does not pay a single cent of tax. It's a huge boost to economic activity. It's a huge boost to people to have a lot more money in their pockets. But for us, it also generates economic activity also. If you list a company on the South Pacific Stock Exchange, you pay a tax rate of only 10%. And we are seeing the interest in many companies that want to be listed on the South Pacific Stock Exchange. Fiji has recently launched its green bonds. As I mentioned last night, we are only the third sovereign in the world to launch green bonds. The first country is Poland, then France, and then Fiji. We are currently being courted by the London Stock Exchange and the Luxembourg Stock Exchange to have our green bonds listed there. These are the kind of advantages that we do need to take. However, we have to ensure that there's transparency within the taxation system that we have. We also have to ensure that the taxation system applies equally. Therefore, tax compliance is very critical. We have had companies in Fiji that have sold Fijian products to sister companies offshore and undersold the product that they've sold from Fiji to the sister companies. And once the sister company sells to the rest of the world, they sell it at 10 times the price, 5 times the price, 4 times the price. And companies have continuously shown losses in Fiji, even though they have been making huge, mega profits offshore. That's one. The other issue, of course, we've had is we have companies in Fiji, for example, that provide retail products, namely supermarkets and others, that set up buying houses in countries like Australia and New Zealand. And they may buy products, food products, from countries like China and various other countries, buy something at 10 cents a tin from China into New Zealand. And then their same company, which they own in New Zealand, will sell that tin of product to the Fijian company at $3 or $5 and sell it to you at $5.50 or $6. Let's say I'm only making 50 cents. I'm making only $1. So what they do achieve is they're able to sock the consumers of Fiji with a huge margin, a mammoth margin, but at the same time are able to move monies out of the country which they normally would not be allowed to move. These are some of the leakages that are taking place. The World Bank study carried out in 2006, the report came out in 2007, assessed that 1/3 of the value of our GDP then, which is worth I think about $6 billion then, today it's worth about $10 billion, was in the black. In other words, under the radar, not captured by wonderful people like Fajrul at FIRCUS. But the reality is that we need to capture this, not just simply to extract every single cent, but to have a particular level of accountability. And that is very important. That's what gives confidence to investors into Fiji and indeed investors in Fiji. As you talked about the rule of law, there are many people, many lawyers I also know, who talk wonderfully in social media, in their circles about the rule of law, accountants, but they are the first ones who are actually making sure that the rules, as far as taxation is concerned, does not apply to everybody, and in particular their clients. There is a certain responsibility we have, not just as professionals, but also as citizens of this country, to ensure that the laws of the country are adhered to. Otherwise, you cannot actually prosper. Try talking to a professional in Singapore and see how they deal with taxation law. See how they have that, whether they have the same level of adherence to what some professionals in Fiji have about adherence to the laws, taxation laws in Fiji. I'd like to thank, of course, our speakers from overseas. I thank you for coming at such short notice and also for being here. Some of them have very tight schedules. We value your contribution. And we look forward to, of course, to piggybacking off your knowledge and also learning from you to be able to ensure that our taxation system is very attractive. I'm happy to say, ladies and gentlemen, before I finish on taxation, today the level of revenue that we collect is more than enough to pay for all of government's operational costs. And in fact, we make a profit of about $860 million. I wouldn't say profit, surplus of $860 million. So all the revenue we collect through FIRCUS or other forms of revenue, we take all that money, pay for all the operational costs, all these lawyers who work for the SG's office, ministers' salaries, toilet paper, photocopying paper, hiring of vehicles, travel, everything, day-to-day operating cost. We pay for that and we have $860 million surplus. So essentially, whenever we build anything, that's only then we borrow. We build a 4-lane road in Nandi, put water systems in Vanuatu, take a water pipe out to Malacca Island, that comes through borrowing money only. So, which is a good space to be in, because you should only ever borrow to build. Because the asset will be there, the debt will finish one day, but the asset will continue to remain there. That's fundamentally the principle on which we are moving on. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to talk about cyberspace, which is actually quite interesting. I managed to get some screenshots of what people have been commenting on the AG's conference over the past 11 hours. Very interesting, I'll read it out to you later. Ladies and gentlemen, if you see around the world, there are a lot of changes that are taking place globally. There is, of course, a change in socio-economic systems. A lot of it has taken place because of globalization. In many countries that were at the forefront of globalization, who were the disciples and indeed the prophets of globalization, are today suffering internally. When I say suffering, it's obviously a subjective term. But because of that, and because of the fact they did not prepare their own citizens for the effects of globalization, we have seen a move to the right in politics. If you look at Europe, if you look at USA, you have, because of the changes, even Australia, you've seen a change in the move to the right of politics. And essentially because there has been a lack of capacity building within the country itself, within the institutions, and the inability of those governments to actually prepare the people for the effects of, for example, things such as climate change, such as globalization. Of course, when you have change in society, when you have change in demographics, people become insecure. And today in Fiji, we have 69.4% of the entire population is below the age of 40. So those of us over the age of 40 are in the minority. The people below the age of 40 are in the majority. How does one who has been used to a system or society where traditionally they went, the elder you were the person who got up on the stage and spoke. You were the person who actually maybe led the parent-teacher association, maybe led the sport organization. But today you have these young ones running the show. Of course they will, because there's more of them. It creates insecurity in some people. And generally, when there is change in society, people tend to do funny things. People tend to react. Coupled with that, of course, we have a change in technology. In Fiji, only about 10 years ago, hardly anybody had a mobile phone. The cost of a unit call, and we only had Vodafone then, a unit cost call at peak hour rate was 99 cents a unit. Today at peak period is only about 23 or 24 cents. You never had 7 up, 5 up. Text messages weren't 5 cents or free in certain times of the day. Today high school students have access to mobile phones. I still remember the day when we were sent off to Radisson Hotel, where we had then Fintel, or Cable and Wireless was one of the shareholders. We had Telecom, we had Vodafone, and we had 2 mediators from the World Bank to try and facilitate and do away with the monopolistic position of Fintel, or Cable and Wireless, and Vodafone, and TFL. And after the first day, I remember calling up the Honourable Prime Minister saying, nobody's budging. And he said to me, don't come back until you have a deal. And we stayed there for 3 days. And we struck a deal around about 3 a.m. in the morning. I still remember that morning, where we had these 3 monopolistic positions, then agreeing to open up the market. Till today it's called the Radisson Accord, because we held it Radisson. As a result of that, you saw a company like Digital coming into the market. It created greater services. Today we have nearly 550,000 smartphones in operation. We have more SIM cards in operation than actual people. Some of you carry 2 SIM cards. As I've said previously, some people carry for legitimate reasons, others for illegitimate reasons. Sometimes there's confusion. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is the reality. But what it has meant that we have people who suddenly were given this tool, this access, to not only get information, but to be able to impart information. So the question is, what type of information is being accessed? What type of information is being imparted? Do we need regulation in that space? And because of the access to technology, there are 2 issues. One of them, of course, we spoke about was the criminal culpability, and the other was civil culpability. The Commissioner of Police, of course, talked about things like electronic transactions that create harm to others by way of funds, ATM scams. We talk about things like pedophilia. We talk about child pornography. We talk about cyberbullying. These are, of course, matters of law and offenses that weren't in existence 10, 15 years ago. They are suddenly new areas. But it also requires us to be able to constantly change the law. Because he did talk about the fact that there is no specific offense at the moment. If I seize the DPP's computer, and I'm a person who has the the legal ability to seize his computer, but if he refuses to give me his password, it's not an offense. We need to create that offense. Should it be an offense? Because what's the point of us seizing the computer if you can't access it? Unless you spend another 5 days maybe getting some expert to try and crack open his computer. So you see, these are the areas in which the law actually constantly needs to develop, and we need to be cognizant about the changing technologies. So the reason why we've actually put this topic, ladies and gentlemen, is that we need to be actually upfront about many of the issues, about what does this technology and the provision of this information, of this leverage, this capacity in individual people's hands, what does it mean? What are some of the challenges we see? Mr. Ada Yarawa talked about issues regarding perhaps racism, about communalism. These are also issues that need to be addressed. There are specific provisions. Now, I would urge the DPP to read some of these provisions, which I'm sure he's aware of. But there are, to answer your question, there are provisions that actually do exist in the law at the moment. So we have provisions such as, for example, a person commits an indictable offense, which is triable summarily, if the person by any communication whatsoever, including electronic communication or by signs or by visible representation intended by a person to be read or heard, A, makes any statement or spreads any report which is likely to, 1, incite dislike or hatred or antagonism of any community, or 2, promote feelings of enmity or ill will between different communities, religious groups or classes of community, or 3, otherwise prejudices the public peace by creating feelings of communal antagonism, or makes any intimidating or threatening statement in relation to a community or religious group or other person, or other than the person's own, which is likely to arouse fear, alarm, or insecurity amongst members of that community or religious group. The philosophical issue, ladies and gentlemen, of course, is that many people couch this under the banner of freedom of expression, your ability to say what you like. There's, of course, certain limitations to rights that we do have, and the Constitution is quite specific in respect of what are those limitations. The European Court of Law, various other international jurisdictions, tribunals have held what those limitations can be. Of course, it's very interesting as to what Germany has done. I think many people who may be actually inciting groups in Fiji or creating enmity would very easily agree with perhaps these laws need to be in place in Germany given its Nazi history, given what happened to the Russians and the Jews and various other minority groups in Nazi Germany. But they would not transpose that belief and have it apply to Fiji. So we need to be able to understand within ourselves and also as a group, are we actually being hypocritical? Whilst there's the need to be able to balance these rights versus the responsibilities, are we actually being hypocritical in our analysis? It is, ladies and gentlemen, very important that governments, as highlighted by the Director of the Human Rights Commission, there is a responsibility on any governments to ensure that we do not slide back into that situation that we had in Fiji a few years ago. It is also the responsibility of government, whether it's Fiji or any other country, to be proactively engaged to ensure we do not have those kind of demarcations in our own countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I also wanted to highlight to you about the nature of what we call the cross-jurisdictional cover. A few years ago in Fiji, before the New Crimes Act came into being, if you commissioned an offence in Australia, and even the effect was felt upon in Fiji, you could not be tried in Fiji. In the same way, in Australia a few years ago, Australians who went and carried out pedophile acts in Philippines or Thailand could not be tried in Australia because those acts were committed in Philippines or Thailand. But of course, now they can be. So similarly, our laws were amended. If I'm sitting in Australia somewhere, or New Zealand, or any other country for that matter, and hacking into the banking system in ANZ downtown Suva, or into your computer, or changing maybe your relative's water authority account, whatever the case may be, or making the bank balance look good because they're going to apply for a visa to go somewhere, that is an offense, and that can be tried in Fiji. Those laws actually have been changed. But we of course need to be aware of that these also are rapidly changing too, and how best we can address them. I pulled this out. This was given to me by my staff. It says, hard-working team of AG. There's a photo of David Solovalu, who's in our office, Leanne Vorasi, and Manisha Ali. And it says at the 2017 Ages Conference, Kings, Angels and Spies, they work in his office. And the comment, Eramasi saying, yeah, they're working something. Then Nemani Tumbo says, ha ha, brosota. Right? Then a person by the name of Sharma Veer says, these are traitors of Fiji. Rajesh Singh says, all should face court for treason charged with Khaiyum, Kon and Beni Marama. And Sanjay Sharma says, ass lickers and whores. Now, if this were to be printed in any of the newspapers, would there be defamation? Would there be slander at the very least? But this is the kind of literature or publication that we have going on in our social media at the moment. It's not only about the Ages Office. Many other people, individuals, are being maligned, for want of a better word, every day. Every day. So the reality is, like I said, I addressed a group of young people, youths, who were involved in this anti-corruption day organized by the UN a few days ago. At the moment you post something on social media, on the blogs, it's taken to be the truth. So if I do a posting and say, the green frog ate the brown horse. Next comment is, where did they do it? Where did the frog eat the horse? Was it nighttime or daytime? Nobody's asking the question whether a frog actually can eat a horse or not. Because they accept that as the truth. That, ladies and gentlemen, actually is a very, in a way, kind of comical, but also quite tragical. It's a tragedy because we have one of the highest rates of literacy in the Pacific. We today have something like 16,500 university and technical college students who are either being assisted through a scholarship or through TELS. Today we have completely free education from early childhood education to year 13. But this is the quality of debate that is actually taking place in cyberspace. It is actually quite a tragedy. So how do we address it? It needs to be addressed. Obviously these things become heightened. I know specifically there are business people who no longer get government contracts, or maybe get government law work, legal work. There are people who used to hold access to power influence, or used to get invited to certain cocktails who no longer do. These are the very people who are at the forefront of this. So the question that needs to be asked is, what is the motivation behind it, and how are we going to address it? Or do we address it at all? There are many things that, for example, that I see as an individual, or you may see as an individual, that may be about you. And you may have a thick skin, and that's fine. You can weather it. People like me don't even have a Facebook account, precisely for one of those reasons. But what's the impact of those kind of discussions, that kind of discourse in social media, and the impact of it in the wider society? On the wider relations between all of us as Fijians. That is very critical. It's very important for us to understand that. And let's not hide behind the guise of freedom of speech to be able to say everything and anything. Just because there may be a few Chinese businesses that have come into Fiji, do we all go out and say, let's kill all the Chinese? Do we say that? We don't. It's not acceptable. So you see, these are the kind of questions we need to be able to ask. Being a lawyer is not only about applying the law as it exists, it's also about the moral and ethical conditions by which you live your lives. And actually, as the Honourable Prime Minister said, you hold a particular position in society. And you need to be able to use that position in society to do social good, not do harm. And the very famous poem that actually was written by, I forget who it was, and I recited that in Parliament once. It's about what happened in Nazi Germany. It's when they came for the Jews, I did not speak out. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. When they came for some other group, I did not speak out. But when they came for me, there was nobody to speak for me. So do not believe that discrimination or the targeting of any group will always remain that, because the entire philosophy behind that is that you could use that type of behavior to have a go at anybody. And that is very important for us to understand, and it does not build a strong society. The fundamental premise of any society is that we need to be able to, on a daily basis, improve the lives of our people. Give them economic empowerment, give them access to services, education, water, roads, electricity. Give them the ability to be able to realize the true worth, the true potential, the true opportunity that can exist for them. That's very, very critical. And if we otherwise do not do that, and if we make exceptions to that particular belief, then we'll get left behind as a nation. And we can see that throughout the world. So this is why we are in a very advantageous position. We have a group of young people, as I keep on saying, the youth of any country, the young people are the fire belly of any country. They can provide the drive. And as government, we need to be able to ensure that we provide the right platform for that. And it is our responsibility to be able to do that. The last example, just to top that topic, finish the topic off, I remember a few years ago, this is I think in about 2004 and 2005, I was walking down the street, walking towards Keynes Genève, coming from the Waimanu Road end, at the lights near Keynes Genève, and a car coming down from the EV tree side, those of you know, who know Suva, those of you who are not from Suva, please visualize, coming along, and made a right turn going towards the Reserve Bank of Fiji. And they went quite fast around the bend. And as the car went around the bend, the door opened and a baby fell out. A very small baby fell out. And this lady, who actually I knew not very well, but I knew her, she grabbed my arm and she said to me, "Indian baby, Fijian baby? Indian baby or Fijian baby?" So you see, her sense of grief, her sense of compassion, her level of interest was going to be determined by the ethnicity of the baby. That's what it fundamentally meant. Our sense of compassion, of grief, of empathy must be determined because they're a fellow human being. They're a fellow human being. And that fellow human being, something wrong has happened to them, or they need assistance, or they're in trouble. That's what really should drive us. And if we develop that sense and get rid of ourselves of the old baggage of the colonial past and the post-independent way of thinking, then we'll be able to empower everybody in Fiji. And then hopefully we won't get this kind of vile stuff that actually exists on social media. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference, as I said, is becoming highly successful, and none of this actually can be put together without a team of people behind the scenes who actually work very hard at no additional cost to government. In fact, this one. Okay, and as has been tradition, we actually try and publicly acknowledge them for their work. We normally call them up here on the stage and give a small token of our appreciation. And I'd like that to happen. And so we'd like to invite our friend from Geneva to do the honors for us and give the gifts out, ladies and gentlemen. And these are not necessarily in any order of hierarchy or preference. But I'd like to, if you could, and please, maybe at the end of it, put your hands together for this entire team. If I could call, firstly, I'm being a bit biased, but I'll call my PA first. Una, she's here. Yasmin, Yasmin, please. Maybe they can come up on the stage here. Can you stand up here on the stage, please? Let's keep the applause at the end of it all, so we can quickly go through it. Yasmin, Lavinia. After Lavinia, we have Shama. Then we have Reena. Sefa. Deepak. Selvin. Ronald. Abhishek. Vimal. Prashant. Siddharth. Prakash. Avnil. Ronil. Kalaveti. Seema. Geraldine. These are the lawyers who didn't do much work. These are the support staff who did bulk of the work, but Seema, Geraldine, Nazia, David, Suliana, Ofa, John. John is the only bald guy in the office. Leanne, and of course Pritika. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for this wonderful team. Somebody said to me, and again, just to highlight a point, maybe it's on a lighter note. I remember when, this is before the 2014 elections, when we had appointed the then Electoral Commission that no longer is in place. We've got a new set of electoral commissioners. And somebody said to me, they said, why have you only appointed Catholics to become electoral commissioners? And I said, what? I said, we know you've done that because you went to Marist. And in fact, I did not even realize, and when I thought about it and looked at it, that out of the 7 commissioners appointed, 5 of them were Catholics. But it was completely unknown to us. We chose them on merit. We chose who we thought would be the best person to do the job. Whether they did or not is another thing, but at that point in time, that's what we thought. When we had our recruitments in the office, based on the OMRS system, the 3 lots. The first lot, I think 98% were all females. The second lot were, I think, about 90% all females. And then we had the third lot, I think it was still female majority, it was about 70%. I don't want to say this, but again, because people in Fiji are obsessed by it, in the first lot of 98% females, 95% were Itauke people. 90% were Itauke in the second lot. I think the third lot was somewhat less. Now you could have the fourth lot, they could all be Indo-Fijians. Fifth lot could be all Eskimos. The point is they all got there on merit. The point is that they were all judged on a level playing field. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, we have today in our office a fantastic group of people that are actually doing the right thing. And I'd like to also publicly acknowledge the Solicitor General and the Deputy Solicitor General, Ms. Tracy Wong and Mr. Sharbada Sharma, for this new implementation of the OMRS, and also this fantastic group of people who have very strong camaraderie amongst themselves to be able to ensure that we deliver the right services. Please put your hands once again for them, please. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation. We look forward to further engagement with you. The topics and the sessions actually have all been recorded. Should you wish copies of it, they'll be available through the AG's team that could make that available to you. We understand some of the speeches have also been put online on YouTube. Of course, we invite you for dinner tonight. It's completely informal, but maybe keep it restricted to, long pants, and I don't think we allow shorts, but please be as informal as possible, and please come and participate and network and enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much.